Hello and welcome everyone. My name is Kelly here with Esri and I'd like to welcome you to our webinar today. So today we're going to be discussing managing business rules for automated aeronautical cartography. And with that, I'll go ahead and turn it over to our first presenter today, Jonathan Weaver.
Thank you, Kelly. Thank you everyone for joining. This is really the last webinar in the series, our charting series that we've had. It's actually the last webinar of the year. We're excited about this. This is kind of taking everything that we've gone through in previous webinars, kind of putting it all together. So we're going to be spending a little bit more time kind of going through those configuration rules, those business rules that really allow that automation on the cartographic process and update process. So just as a recap, within our charting series, we first talked about data management. That was back in June. This was focused on setting up the aeronautical database. How do we import AXM data to initialize that database? And then how do we go through and review some of those changes that are occurred as a result of some of the data updates or the AXM updates? And then stepping into the summer, we took a look at the aeronautical cartography bit. That was focused really on the template configuration. So taking our out-of-the-box template and hooking it up to the database that we established in that first webinar. So today, we're focusing on the business rules and the automation. We're going to take a closer look at those rules, the business rules that do enable the automation. We're going to peel back the curtain a little bit, so to speak. And so this webinar is probably going to get technical at times. The slides, for the most part, will remain kind of at a higher level, but once I pass it over to Nick, the aim is to really kind of dig deeper into those configuration rules, into the business rules. And then we'll have a slide to kind of look at the different ways that we can actually automate different parts of the process. So again, the last webinar, we discussed the template configurations that we have. These templates can largely be divided into kind of two parts. So there's project-related elements that you see here. So that's the project file, the legend, the table, scale bar, data-driven elements. You could almost look at these. This part of the template is everything that's kind of outside of the main map or the map extent. And then we also have the business rules. When we talk about business rules, we're largely focusing in on these areas. So cartographic features. This is deciding what features we include in a chart, getting into annotation, what text goes into the annotation box and how does that look, symbology, how do we really depict the features on a map based on certain attributes that exist, and then finally it's the rule-based masking. So how do we ensure that the chart is actually readable? And it's going to be these areas that we're going to really focus in on in today's webinar. So those business rules that I just kind of mentioned in that previous slide tie directly into the cartographic process. And it's largely going to be on the update cartography side, but just kind of stepping through the overall process, we begin with data updates, again, importing or modifying aeronautical data, running change detection. This is report generation of what's changed in the charts, what charts are impacted, how many changes per chart, even going so far as what does the change look like in the next AirX cycle versus the previous AirX cycle. So you actually have that visual inspection with the completed cartography. And then you get to the updated cartography. I'm going to come back to this because there's actually multiple steps involved in the updating of cartography. Moving around, we've got update the surround elements. Commonly, these are things outside of the map extent. If they're data-driven tables, for example, these are tables such as airspace overflow. For restricted airspace, you might place just the identification on the map, but actually create a table that's linked to it that shows the ident along with the upper and lower limits of the airspace, things like that. And then finally, the batch export, which is really exporting the chart to print-ready formats that are included in the state AIP. So like I said, we're going to focus in on the update cartography part of it. So when we talk about update cartography, we're actually talking about 4 different steps within that process. One is creating the chart features or cartographic features. Then we run prepare aviation data, which is really a data mining exercise and process, followed by cartographic refinement. You can look at this as more the manual kind of cartographic placement. We're going to do a lot of the automated placement through the solution on its own, but there's going to be areas of congestion that users need to go in and actually refine some of the placement. and then finally the mask generation. So you'll notice that the steps in green are all geoprocessing tools. Because they're geoprocessing tools, it means that we can actually run these individually or actually put them together as part of a larger workflow and automated process. These are also the areas where we have the business rules associated within the solution, and you have access to configure those. So again, cartographic features, prepare aviation data, and create masks. Those are all kind of the automated steps within that process. Cartographic refinement, that's really requiring a charting analyst to ensure the placement is correct in those areas of congestion. So in the next few slides, we're going to take a closer look at each of these automated steps, because that's largely where all of the business rules exist. And we'll start off with the cartographic features. So again, cartographic features, these are effectively the chart copies of the main aeronautical data. So for a given area of interest, we create a set of chart features to support things like symbolizing the feature differently on different charts. Annotation associated with a feature might be placed in different locations due to differences in the chart type or the amount of congestion in the area. In some cases, the annotation might be close to a chart boundary, which you need to nudge it in one direction. In another chart, it might need to be nudged in a different direction. In some cases, you might even do what we call as a cartographic offset. This means we offset the feature, the cartographic feature slightly, just for readability. And we might have to do this differently on a chart-by-chart basis. So again, this is a geoprocessing tool. When we run this, it will look at the area of interest, those are the chart extents, and create a copy of the feature. In this case, we're going to take a look at airports. So for every feature that falls within that extent, it's going to create a copy of that feature. So those are the red dots that you see in the graphic there. Now that's good and might support a lot of the different use cases, but in some cases, we need to provide an extra level of intelligence to the system that said, look, we don't need to create every airport that falls within these chart extents. We may want to create only airports that have runways of 9,000 feet or greater. So it's kind of further reducing the amount of features that are being created for that particular chart extent. And we do that, we accomplish that through what we call extraction queries. So it's an optional piece that goes into the geoprocessing tool. Again, this is where that business rule comes into play. So we can start to outline very specifically, not only based on the geographic extents of the chart, but also based on other criteria that we need to include to make sure that we're only creating copies of the main data that we need to within those chart extents. Now we'll get into the symbology and annotation. When it comes to these two components, I would say this is where the most important business rules are applied. It's really here that makes a visual chart, a SID, an en route chart, and so forth. So the business rules here really tell the system how to depict the features and how to annotate them. And this is actually done in a multi-step process. Now from the user perspective, they're only going to be running a single tool, which is called prepare aviation data. But behind the scenes, there's different things that are happening, and there's different rules and configurations that we have access to make sure that we're getting the proper output. So again, we're looking at prepare aviation data as a geoprocessing tool. This is seeking out information from the database, which is structured after AIXM, means it's highly normalized. In some cases, it's not really optimized for cartography. And then using a configuration file that's in a JSON format, it knows exactly what data to seek out. And that data is going to be used in some way for either symbolizing a feature or assembling the text for an annotation. Now, the output of this geoprocessing tool is a formatted string that you see here. And it's basically, as I mentioned, it's going through and doing a data mining effort, collecting from different related tables attribute information to store on the cartographic feature. So with that in mind, a property of the feature layer in ArcGIS Pro for that cartographic feature layer, if you will, uses an arcade expression to really pull apart the individual elements. In the case of symbology, it might look at some of these elements to test against. So for example, We're interested in the type of airspace. Based on the type of airspace, we apply this specific symbol. So for control zone, there's one symbol. For restricted airspace, there's another symbol. In the case of annotation, it's actually taking all of these components, all of these individual attributes, if you will, and restructuring it to create essentially the label box that you see in the lower right-hand corner. But again, from a user perspective, from a charting analyst perspective, they're running a single geoprocessing tool. Kind of these arcade expressions that are in the background are just happening on the layer as things are being run. So user's not going to be interacting with the arcade expressions unless they need to go in and actually change some kind of configuration. So if they need to change how the label box appears, or if they need to change the symbology of the control zone, they have access to do that within these arcade expressions. Then let's see, the last piece in terms of the cartographic process is rule-based masking. Masking really helps with the readability of these aeronautical charts. In some cases, there's so much information that's being conveyed in the chart that without the masking, these charts become unreadable because everything is just essentially drawing on top of each other. Now, there's two parts to masking and using the masking tools. Both steps are geoprocessing tool. This is kind of a theme that you're hearing. The first is actually creating the masks. These are the polygons that get created around the symbol or the annotation. Those polygons are used to actually block out other layers underneath. The masks, as you can see in the upper right, can be created in different ways. So what we call a box, just simply a box around the text. That's what was used in this example in the lower left-hand corner. There's convex hull, which kind of provides a little bit tighter area around the text. Exact and exact simplified are very similar in the sense that they're just following the text components very specifically in an exact manner. So there's going to be ways where that matters more for some text versus other text. So again, these are part of the rules that we define in a rule file in terms of how things are created or how these polygon masks are created. Now, once the polygons are created, we use those to tell the system which specific layers to mask out. So if you think about halos, for example, in annotation, they just mask out everything underneath it. Now, with masking rules, we can actually specify what layers we want to block out. So this is an example over here where we've got a box where it masks out the terrain shading underneath, but we're still allowing the symbology of the airspace lines to come through. And if you can see it slightly, there's actually the contour lines that are coming through as well. So we're not masking just everything underneath. We're being very deliberate about what layers we want to mask underneath. So again, this is all defined as part of a rule file that's provided as part of a template configuration. Users just need to run this geoprocessing tool. And Nick's going to dive deeper into this element as well. All right, the last slide I have is on the automation. When we automate that cartographic process, we're really creating a repeatable workflow. That process means that the charts are going to be produced in a really consistent way in terms of their look and feel. The rules are going to be applied evenly across all of the charts. Because we're automating it, we're also speeding up that production process and making the process overall more efficient. Now we have different layers or levels of automation, as you can see here. You've heard me speak about the geoprocessing tools. In ArcGIS Pro, we rely heavily on that geoprocessing framework. So you can see here on the right, we've got a toolbox which is composed of literally hundreds of tools that we can use across the system. Now, because of this framework, we can automate the individual steps. So thinking back to creating cartographic features, even that piece is automated to the extent that, look, we can make sure that the system goes through and creates all the cartographic features that we need. We can also use what we call Model Builder to actually link multiple geoprocessing tools together, all done within a user interface as well. So that gives us the ability to automate just certain portions of the workflow. And then we can get into some of the more advanced automation tools, such as Python notebooks, and Python scripting. Python notebooks is really kind of taking Python and organizing it in a notebook where users can execute certain portions of it. Again, it's automating just portions of the overall workflow. And then when you look at Python scripting, well, that's when you can really automate almost the entire production process using some kind of Python script that's using, could be using elements of the GP tools, model builder, Python notebooks, so kind of pulling a lot of this together. So that's the last slide I have. Before I turn it over to Nick, I want to run a quick poll question that's going to be based on what you see here, but also it's going to provide us some information a little bit later because we're going to run another poll question. So the poll question is, which of these automation capabilities have you used in the past? So starting with geoprocessing tools, model builder, Python notebooks, Python scripts. And if you haven't used any of these tools in the past, that's fine. We'd like to just kind of have an understanding of where our users are using a lot of these tools. So it looks like the results are coming in. We've got about half the people that have voted. Let's wait just a couple more seconds to allow some more to vote. Okay, Kelly, let's go ahead and take a look at the results. Okay, so as you can see, many of you have used the geoprocessing tools, and not surprising. This is something that was a part of the ArcMap experience as well as it is in ArcGIS Pro, and same with Model Builder. And I'm actually quite surprised to see the number of people that have used Model Builder. I think it's great. I happen to like Model Builder and the ease of using Model Builder. Python notebooks, not surprising that only a small percentage of you have used Python notebooks. Something that's relatively new, but something that Nick is going to kind of show us, and maybe you'll find some uses for this kind of down the road. And then Python scripts. So 46% of you have used Python scripts, and a handful of you look like haven't used any of these. That's fine. That's why we have these webinars, to help educate and make sure that you're aware of some of these capabilities. So thank you, Kelly. I think you can close the poll down. And so with that, we're gonna move into our demonstration portion of this. I'm gonna pass it over to Nick. He's gonna really kind of go deep into certain areas of our technology here with respect to these business rules, lift up the hood so we can actually look inside and see how these business rules work. We're going to start with creating the cartographic features, that extraction query, how that feeds into that process. We'll look at the prepare aviation data, the data mining aspect, the configuration file with the JSON, and then some of the expressions, arcade expressions, and then our masking rules. And then finally, he's going to put this all together within a Python notebook. So basically taking those individual geoprocessing tools, creating Python from it, and then embedding that into a Python notebook. So with that, Nick, whenever you're ready, you can take over the screen share and kind of take us through these components.
There we go. Are you able to see my screen?
It's coming up and can hear you loud and clear.
All right, great. So good morning, my name's Nick, or I guess good morning, good afternoon, or good evening. In previous demonstrations, we've discussed the cartographic capabilities of ArcGIS Pro for aviation and how together our tools enable a configurable enterprise charting workflow with lots of capability for automation. In this demonstration, we want to share specifics about the configurations and various tools that allow you to more easily automate your charting workflow in ArcGIS Pro. In this first demonstration, we'll take a deeper look at the business logic behind the scenes and show how these are configured and applied to meet the needs of your organization. So let's start by talking about the AOI feature class. In our charting schema, there's an AOI feature class. This will act as your product library. AOIs contain important information like tags, as well as map IDs tying the AOIs to specific charts. Everything starts with these AOIs, but the most critical part of how we manage all of our charts' separate cartographic content is those map IDs. Each chart will have its own set of cartographic features, annotations, and masks, as Jonathan covered. And these are all coming from the same database. To get things set up for any one chart, you just need to set definition queries for map IDs. So we can do that on the AOI feature class. And you can see we have various AOIs right now. And we'll set a definition query for this San Fran AOI. And we'll be left with the AOI that we want to start working on for this particular chart. From the AOI properties window, you can see a tree of chart types. From here, you can associate a given AOI with your active map. You can also access the AOI properties or just see important info related to your selected AOI from the Aviation Charting ribbon. We have our Aviation Charting ribbon up here. From this tool, we can actually access the properties we just had open. And here we can see information about our selected AOI. You may have noticed I mentioned tags on the AOI feature class. Why are tags important? From the Aviation Charting ribbon, you can see we have some tools for cartographic extraction queries and preferences. We use tags to manage which preferences or queries are used while running our geoprocessing tools. This way, you can have multiple queries and customized preferences supporting your various chart types. For example, when I want to generate cartographic features for my low en route chart, I may want to filter things differently than for my high chart. You use extraction queries for this, and you associate which query is applied for which chart with these tags. You may also have preferences for processing ATS routes that are different between chart types. The bottom line is tags allow us to use the same geoprocessing tools in repeatable, automated workflows with parameters specific to each of your chart types. So let's just take a quick look at some of these extraction queries and preferences that use tags. So first we can look at our preferences here. And we have a few for handling report chart changes, generating airspace lines and areas. And you can see the tags can actually separate the different chart types, and they'll automatically be picked up by the tool. We go over to our extraction queries. We'll just kind of drag this to the bottom. We can see some of these and their tags and logic. Again, extraction queries define what features from the main data set of potentially thousands of features we want cartographic copies generated of. For example, we may only need to create carto features that may meet certain attribute-driven criteria for low or high charts. Really, any of the different chart types could have their own required outputs. We can handle all of this with extraction queries and tags. The information is stored in the AIS extraction query table within the database. Let's say we would like only cartographic copies of airports to be generated and not heliports for our low en route tagged map. Let's ensure that extraction query has proper tags. We can see down here for the ADHP feature class, we're querying out only aerodromes. So we're not including heliports, and our tags are en route and low. Now, what if I want to include features from outside the AOI extent? This is where cartographic exceptions come in. With these tools, we can bring features outside the AOI in for carto generation so that we can reference them on our map. This information is stored on the AIS carto exceptions table within the database. Let's generate some aviation cartographic features. In this case, we'll generate aerodrome carto features that fall within the AOI, and again, while incorporating our saved extraction query. So I'm going to go back to our history tab for the geoprocessing tool and open up our Generate Aviation Cartographic Features tool. And right now the parameter is the main feature, cartographic, and our AOI. Go ahead and run that. So the blue circles are aerodromes from our main data set. Red dots will be cartographic features. The dashed green outline is our AOI. After we've run the tool, we have cartographic copies of all the main features within the AOI extent. If we only want to generate cartographic copies of aerodromes and not heliports, we can simply incorporate our extraction query. You'll notice a few carto features were removed. After we run this, because they were heliports. We also mentioned cartographic exceptions, which can be used to include things like designated points or nav aids that live just outside the AOI extent so that we can reference them on our chart. In this demo, we're going to just include a few more aerodromes that fall outside of our AOI extent so that they're generate when we run this tool again. So let's go ahead and go back to our tool here where we can include more features. And we'll click include, and it's going to bring these 3 features in next time we run the tool. And over here we have our cartographic exception statistics showing we just included 3 features. Now this is going to run, and we've included these additional parameters. So you just saw a few features get removed, and that's because those were heliports. And we now have 3 new cartographic features generated outside the AOI, and that's because of our carto exceptions. Now that we've generated our cartographic features, let's talk about how we handle labeling and symbology in the charting workflow. The AIS charting data model is built to support the import and export of AXN messages. This means there can be some complex relationships between potentially multiple feature classes and tables. Labeling and symbology logic can be as simple or complex as your organization needs. The Prepare Aviation Data tool is how we data mine required attributes from across the database and push them to fields on your cartographic features, as Jonathan discussed earlier. So first, I'm going to open up one of the JSON configurations that we use to run the Prepare Aviation Data tool. And the bottom line is, across your different chart types, you might need certain attribution from within the database to support your labeling and symbology. So this is an example here. We have the ADHP, so that's our aerodromes feature class. And we're going back to the main feature, pulling this information and pushing it to this field. So let's go ahead and run that tool. So once this is done, we're going to open up the cartographic feature attribute table, and we'll see that those fields that we looked at in our JSON have been pushed to the main info field. And what that has given us the capability of doing is now we can publish this online, we can apply our arcade scripts, and it's feeding directly off of its own attribute table rather than having to continuously establish relationships across the database. So once this is done, we'll go ahead and open that. We can close our extraction queries. And we have our main info field here. And you'll notice that these attributes that have been pushed are the same ones we identified in our JSON configuration file.
So Nick, the real value here is the ability to kind of access that information across those different related tables. So I think in the JSON file that you had, it was just pulling information from the core main aerodrome table, but imagining, for airspace, for example, if you're going to the organization authority, if you're going to these other related tables, pulling all of that in, it really optimizes performance in terms of display and just kind of panning around once you have all that information placed onto the feature.
So now we can talk about our labeling and symbology a little further now that we've prepared the data for it. Having this needed attribution stored now on our Carto features, we can apply that labeling and symbology, as well as publish to Esri online portals with the same rules applied. So far, we have discussed how we can query and select specific features for cartographic generation, as well as how we can configure the Prepare Aviation Data tool so that it returns the information we need for labeling and symbology. Within our aviation charting data package, we include sample Prepare Aviation Data scripts as well as sample labeling and Symbology arcade scripts. We also have some utilities and an aviation charting style based on common ICAO charts. So let's go ahead and take a look at an example Symbology arcade strip just for the aerodromes. So here we have an arcade script that's going to support Symbology for our aerodromes, which is the ADHP feature class. We have a function that's commonly used across all of our scripts, and this is to parse the output of the Prepare Aviation data tool. And then we create a dictionary of those same features we identified in the JSON, and then we can apply our logic. So if it's an aerodrome, show me this symbol. If it's a heliport, show me this symbol. Otherwise, no symbol. So let's go ahead and copy this code, and we can apply it directly to our Carto within Pro. So once we've applied the script, you can see that it's picked up the fact that we have airport, civil, and land visual. That's the symbol that's going to be calling, because that's the only data that was found, thanks to our extraction queries. With that done, we can just do match layer symbology to a style, pick that sample style that comes with our data package, run, and you'll see that symbology will be applied to each of the airports. And once that's done, we'll turn off main features so that it's a little more clear. And anytime you see one of these type of expression windows within Pro, that means you can apply your own customizations, which is really nice. So let's turn off our main features. Now we have symbolized aerodromes. And obviously we need labels, so that'll be next. So here we have our labeling arcade script, and it's very similar to our Symbology one. We're going to use the same function to parse through that data that the Prepare Aviation data tool output. In this case, we're just going to be creating output text strings for our labels and eventual annotation. So we have a little bit of formatting, like setting the font type, colors, things like that can all be put in here. You can really customize this a lot. So we'll go ahead and copy this, and we can apply it directly to our Carto feature. Now, once this is applied, you'll see the aerodrome labels have been formatted with the correct font, the color that we've chosen, and everything's all set. Once you're happy with your labeling, expression and how your labels are looking with the dynamic labeling, you can incorporate that script into an annotation feature class. While dynamic labeling is great for rapid visualization of labels, annotation features will allow you to move labels around for each chart individually, as well as apply masking. And again, those would be separated by map IDs. So you could have sets of labels in custom positions for all of your different charts. Once annotations are generated and placed, we make and apply masking so that we can mask out certain features behind our labels or feature symbology. If we take a look at this example chart that I just opened, we can see how both feature symbology and annotations are being masked. This is controlled by our masking rule file, where we define what and how we want masking to take place. And Jonathan mentioned that earlier. So here's an example masking rule file. This masking rule file allows us to specifically define what feature or annotation features we want to apply masking to, as well as what features behind them we would like masked. So we can see some of the parameters here, like box. Jonathan was talking about the masking types, how big you want the mask to be outside of the feature it's masking, so on and so forth. And we can see the results of that masking rule on this chart. So we've masked out our ATS route annotation, the bearings, the aerodrome labels, but not the callouts for airspace. So we can see the differences there. Now, we've discussed a lot about configurations and some aviation cartographic workflow. so far by manually interacting with these tools. Next, we'll show you how easy it is to automate all these steps once you have sufficiently templated your configurations. And I'm just going to kind of set this up a little bit. As you may know, Python is well integrated into Pro. Most of our tools are Python geoprocessing tools. The geoprocessing side of Pro also maintains a detailed history. So once you run Python-based tools, you can easily copy out that Python code and then start building a notebook or a script of your own. So if we go back to that history tab I mentioned earlier, we can see that the steps that I've been running are all stored here. Now, if I wanted to start building a notebook that had Python as steps, that I could kind of have a described workflow that somebody could come in and just run steps with instructions, I can simply right-click the results of having run the tool previously and copy that Python command. And of course, I made this Python notebook in exactly that way. This notebook is going to perform all of the activities we discussed in Demo 1 automatically. So let's go ahead and kick that off. The tools currently running are the Generate Aviation Cartographic Features tool, followed by Prepare Aviation Data, and two tools that will make and apply masking for us. In this case, we also have Annotation Feature classes, and once the Prepare Aviation Data tool is run, annotation is automatically generated. And because we have the business rules for our arcade, symbology, and labeling applied, those will automatically appear as well. There are multiple ways an organization can handle automation with ArcGIS. You can, of course, use Python scripts in the ArcPy console, or even turn those into Python script tools in your own geoprocessing toolboxes. You can also use Python notebooks shown here, which is easy for non-Python literate folks to follow along and learn with. You could also just have certain parts automated with Python, or a combination of Model Builder, Python, or even Workflow Manager. The bottom line is we can help you find the best path forward for automating your workflows in ArcGIS Pro for aviation charting. And I think we had a poll question that Jonathan was going to ask.
So we've got the poll question that's coming up, and it's really around what degree of automation do you prefer in your charting workflows? If you think back to my automation slide, we talked about those different levels being the geoprocessing tools, the model builder, Python notebooks, and Python scripts. So in ArcGIS, we have the freedom to automate really as much or as little as we want. So the question is, what degree of automation do you prefer in your charting workflows? So little to no automation, meaning I like to be involved at every step of the process. I like to run an individual tool, see the results, move on to the next tool, run that. You might want to automate portions of the workflow. So having kind of these review points along the way, but really kind of stringing some of the tools together. So you've got elements of the workflow that's automated, but not the entire workflow. And then you've got full automation. So these are for users that just want to press a button and have the system automate as much as possible. So with that in mind, let's take a look at the results. It looks like we've got close to 55% of you having responded. Okay, not surprising, I suppose. Most people want some level of automation here. I think I'm a little surprised that there's only 5% of you requested little to no automation. I expected that to be a little bit higher, but I think that's fine. I think what it tells us, and it's really, where we need to put some effort, kind of going into the solution, is to focus on that automation component. And it was, kind of split evenly between automating portions of the workflow and having that full automation. So pressing a button and just letting the system derive all of the cartography and other related components. So I think with that, Kelly, we can close out the poll and transition back to Nick. And it looks like we've got elements on your chart now, Nick.
Yeah, so as this is running, we can go back in and take a look at the history. So even though we're not manually touching these tools, the Python notebook's running them for us, and those are still going to get stored in the history here. So we can see that it's generated aviation cartographic features, prepared aviation data, and right now it's just going out to all of the annotations that were generated and masking each of those features. And we'll be able to see the outputs here. So these are feature outline masks, and I'm just gonna put the notebook away so that we can kind of get in here a little bit. And I'm gonna leave the masks up just so we can see that we used box, like in our rule that Jonathan talked about. And when we take that away, we can see that it's punching through features behind it that we defined in our rule file. And so we've covered quite a bit here of the workflow and a bit on how automation can be set up from running the geoprocessing tools and eventually apply masking. And now we have our chart.
Great, thank you, Nick. I'm going to bring it back over to the slides. I've got just one more slide to kind of wrap things up. And hopefully you're seeing my screen again, which kind of where we left off at the demonstration. What you saw Nick kind of demonstrate was, yes, digging deep into the business rules, but focus on kind of these high-level steps of cartographic features. How do we mine data from the normalized database to create the symbology and text that we need, masking, and then dipping into the automation. So really around Python notebooks. I think with Python notebooks, and Nick mentioned this, it can be a good way to kind of help bring staff up to speed. It kind of lays out that overall chart production process, and they can go through and execute those individual components, or if they want to execute all of it together, as kind of Nick showed, you can do that as well for that kind of more end-to-end automation of the workflow. So just kind of in summary here, what we really wanted to focus and key in on in terms of today's webinar is about taking those pre-configured templates and looking into those templates at those stored business rules. How do we modify those business rules? How can we take those business rules to help drive some of the automation as well? They're all configurable. You can go in and change things as you need to fit your style of charts, the rules that you have in terms of not only depicting, but what is actually shown on the charts, as Nick showed with the extraction queries. So a lot was shown. Again, it went a little bit technical. I think at this point, we're going to open the floor up for questions. And I think Kiyoshi's going to come online and kind of take us through questions if we have any.
Yeah. Hey there, Jonathan. Can you hear me?
Yep.
Great. Yeah, so we have just a few questions, a couple questions really. So I guess just as a reminder, if people have questions that they'd like to ask, feel free to enter those in the question pod, and we will get them in the queue here. I guess the first question that came up was about the extraction queries that Nick showed. Wondering if there's a way to kind of force or enforce the extraction query to be used, kind of make it like a non-optional parameter. I think from my experience, I think working with the product team, we sort of chose to make that an optional parameter so that if users don't decide to use queries, that they don't have to fill out that parameter every time they run it. So I think in my experience, the way to kind of force that or make sure it's used is to wrap the Python, wrap the geoprocessing tool, the generate aviation cartographic features tool, in a Python script where you can then kind of have a little more control over the parameters. I imagine that might work in other portions of our automation framework, whether it's Model Builder or notebooks as well. But yeah, I think that would be the answer to that question, unless Nick or Jonathan, you have other thoughts on that one?
No, I think that's good. If it's in a notebook or a Python script and the parameters just included, then there's no you're not going to accidentally forget to fill the box out.
Exactly. Yeah, and I guess that sort of speaks to maybe a larger message that Jonathan kind of touched on in his slides as well, is that, you know, what we're really striving to do with this approach in Pro is make everything part of the geoprocessing framework, which is really kind of core to, you know, how ArcGIS Pro works, or, you know, how you do your geoprocessing in ArcGIS Pro. But another big part of that is that because those things are part of that framework, they can all be kind of wrapped up in Python. So you can get yourself, you know, you get that automation benefit, but you also get that little bit of control over the behavior by doing that as well. So let's see, the only other question I'm seeing right now is whether the question about if we can accomplish this same process in ArcMap, and I can, you know, take a stab at that one as well. What Nick showed, the kind of process we went over today is really specific to our workflow in Pro. It's really kind of intended to be the replacement workflow for how we do this in ArcMap. So the sort of big answer is that yes, the process of, you know, creating a chart can be done in ArcMap, but the steps in the workflow and the configuration is going to be a little bit different. We've really modeled this you know, process in Pro kind of after our, you know, based on our experience in doing this in ArcMap, but our hope is that it's, you know, our intention is that it's, you know, faster, easier, more efficient in Pro. So short answer is yes, but I think we would still sort of suggest anybody going forward to try to do this in Pro. Another couple questions trickling in here. Thank you for those. There's a question about how many of the queries, rules, the kind of configuration pieces are pre-configured versus how many the users may have to write themselves. Nick or Jonathan, you want to take a stab at that one?
Sure. So right now we're with our data package, we kind of give everybody some ICAO en route based configurations, but we do plan in the future on kind of expanding that across more ICAO standard chart types.
Great, thanks, Nick. Yeah, the template that Jonathan mentioned and that we kind of covered in a previous webinar has some of those pre-configured expressions. I think in the last webinar, if you know, want to look for the recording of that, goes over how to take that template and kind of modify it slightly or apply it and use it out of the box. But yeah, then our goal going forward is to kind of grow that collection of templates for other chart types.
Yeah, and maybe the kind of going back to the question a little bit, the answer is you don't have to write anything yourself. In fact, we don't want you to. We've got a great starting point for which you can take those pre-configured rules, even if it's not the exact same chart. So the en route configuration, you can take that as a starting point for your VFR configuration or visual chart configuration. So, and Nick mentioned we're going to be rolling out more and more of these templates and template configurations. So again, the idea is that you don't have to start from scratch, and if you don't want, you don't have to write anything. It'll be done, provided you're okay with how the chart looks, you know, based on the ICAO requirements that we have and have built in.
Yeah, that's a great point, Jonathan. Even if you don't, you know, want to use the COTS template exactly as it is, you're not starting from scratch if you're having to write these expressions. There's lots of samples out there to kind of build upon, so you're not having to start from ground zero. Next question is a bit of a migration question. If you are a user in ArcMap and you have masking rules, you know, do we need to kind of recreate or migrate those over to Pro? Again, the short answer on this is that they will need to be reconfigured. They're put together a little kind of in a different way than they were in our ArcMap solution. So there's, you know, a little bit of effort involved in doing that. But I will say that in Pro, our approach with masking, there's some, I guess, improved capabilities in Pro that allow us to kind of, I guess, better define the masks themselves, make them a little more efficient. Maybe the best way to say it is that the masks in Pro really look for those specific areas of where the feature that's doing the masking and the feature being masked overlap, and we kind of create the masks polygons just where needed. Whereas in ArcMap we tended to have a mask for the whole annotation or symbol or whatever. So you do have to kind of recreate those. The those rules, the information that you're building to that rule in terms of what's masking what, and I think Nick showed in the rule file the size of the mask, the type of the mask. That information is largely the same. It's just kind of structured slightly differently. Next question is kind of asking about the solution in the future, a bit of the roadmap, and maybe I think Amit is still on the call. Maybe he can speak to this a little bit, but basically just asking what we can expect from ArcGIS Aviation in the future. Are there new tools we're looking on, or maybe what's our general focus for the near future?
Yeah, currently we are looking at, like as Nick mentioned, like we're looking at different chart templates or tools required to generate your VFR charts. So around that, we're looking at adding some new obstacle tools to aggregate some of the obstacles. A lot of surround elements are planned in the future releases. So, and in the future, we're also looking at adding tools and capabilities around your terminal procedure charts. So there are a lot of tools that we release with each release. 2.9 release was another release where we added more capabilities for AIXM import and export. So yeah, a lot of new things coming up. But if there's anything specific that you guys want us to work on, I will be happy to talk to you guys about that. So I think we have the email alias shown on the slide here. So if you have any feedback, questions, we'll love to hear from you guys.
Yeah, and if I could add to that as well, because I could almost read that question a different way. Obviously, the solution is focused on chart production, but I could almost read this question as kind of going beyond chart production. Are there things that we're working on? And we are. There's several different areas that we're really looking at and kind of taking our larger platform and configuring it for certain workflows. So think about accident investigation for civil aviation authorities. How do we leverage tools within ArcGIS like SiteScan, some of the field mapping tools to assist in accident investigation recovery operations? Might be things around flight analytics, for example. So how do we take ArcGIS Pro and use some of the more advanced spatial analytical components out of Pro to do some of those flight analytics? But those are just kind of configurations of other areas of our platform. I think, as Amit said, we're always open to ideas in terms of maybe there's certain configurations that just package well and nicely fit in with the solution, and we're happy to take a look at that, explore that as well.
Yeah, that's a great point, Jonathan. We're focused kind of on the ArcGIS Aviation Charting product here, but that's built upon a kind of foundational framework of ArcGIS Pro, which includes a whole lot of other capabilities. So we're starting to look at how to kind of incorporate those in other aviation-related ways.
And I'm kind of jumping ahead a little bit in terms of the webinar and the survey questions that come after the webinar, but this year we focused a lot on our charting capabilities with the webinars, and that's because we hit that parity equivalency within ArcMap and ArcGIS Pro. Things are done a little bit differently in some cases, but you can now do chart production inside of ArcGIS Pro. So we wanted to kind of go through all of those capabilities, and that's why we had the webinar series the way we had that. Looking ahead to next year, over those webinars that we've had, we've looked at your survey questions, and we're going to be covering topics like that, such as accident investigation, might be ADQ. So we're looking at all those survey responses that you've provided in the past. We want you to make sure you provide survey responses after this webinar as well, because that does shape what we're planning to do into next year.
Great. Got a couple final questions here as we're nearing the end of the hour. One is about training. So does Esri provide learning opportunities? And they list a couple sort of general spatial data and analytics or cartography courses. Again, the short answer to that is yes. There's lots of training available in a variety of different formats. I did drop in the chat earlier a link to the learning path for ArcGIS Python notebooks. So that is built on the kind of Learn ArcGIS framework, which is a series of kind of short self-study, self-guided lessons on various topics. So that would definitely be a place to start for some of those general things. We have similarly, there's other instructor-led trainings, recording video seminars. I don't want to say webinars. I think they call them web training courses, things like that, that are available through the training website as well. And I'll drop a link to the website in the chat there as well. And then last question I think here is about the recordings for the previous webinars. So where can I find those? Looks like Jonathan's bringing the site up on screen.
And it looks like Amit dropped the link in to the chat window, but this has all of the webinars that we went through this year. Again, most of them focused on charting. We did do this building a system of engagement for obstacles and terrain. You'll be able to access the recordings, and then this will just change over from register now to view the recording within the next day or two.
Great. That's the end, Jonathan. That's all we got.
Okay. Great. Well, thank you. As a reminder to everybody, this webinar has been recorded, and there'll be a follow-up email that gets sent out. There is a survey that's going to be presented to you once the webinar is over. We do appreciate your feedback and do encourage you to complete that survey. As I mentioned, that's going to really shape what we cover next year, because we're going to start to move on beyond charting into other areas, as I mentioned. So with that, really appreciate everybody's attention for the last hour. Hope you found it useful, and we look forward to engaging you further in the future. Thank you.